Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Happy National Ag Day. Just a lot going on in Washington, D.C. and with national policy and legislation. A lot of changes going on too. So we wanted to host this webinar meeting just to keep everybody in the loop and inform everybody of what's going on, give a little national legislation update. So our first guest, I'm sure all of you know, Rob Larew, National Farmers Union President, joins us today. So Rob, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks for being with us today.
All righty, thank you, Luke. And it's great to join you here. But boy, am I waiting for the chance when I can get out to South Dakota again and join you in person. You know, it feels like this is a part of every conversation I have now. Is, oh, have you had the vaccine? No. When are you going to get it? But I'm one shot down. I have another one scheduled next week. So I'm already trying to fill up plans for travels around the country to get out and get my boots dirty. As Luke mentioned, there is a lot going on here in DC. We have a new administration, a new Secretary of Agriculture, again, a repeat again. And obviously new folks in the White House. And so there's a lot of debate right now about what those agendas will mean for agriculture. And then obviously it wasn't but just a few weeks ago that National Farmers Union had its convention, and we gathered together, set our priorities, and that's the marching orders that we have for this coming year. So I'm pretty excited about a couple of places where I think we have some real opportunity for some change here in a positive way. And in a couple of places where I think we need to keep our eyes open and be really, maybe cautiously optimistic, but a little skeptical at the same time, and make sure that efforts out of DC don't have those unintended and negative impacts out there on the farm. So really, I want to start off with probably one of our biggest priorities going forward this year. And that is a priority that's been in Farmers Union for a long time, but it's really getting a handle on the consolidation in the food and ag space that has been going on for decades now. I sometimes describe this as one of those negative bipartisan issues, because I don't care whether it's been a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. We've just seen the constant drumbeat of larger and larger farms, larger and larger and fewer input companies. And obviously for those ranchers, they know the consolidation among packers and the industry there and the impacts that it has. So it's a massive issue. But I think for the first time in a very long time, we have an opportunity to build some support for a number of things in this space, which could be really good. Obviously, it's one of the big priorities that come out of convention, but what does that really mean? So big picture, it means trying to get a handle on the consolidation itself. And so that means things like working on our antitrust laws so that companies, mega corporations can't just continue to collapse and get bigger and have fewer and fewer choices out there. We know that when there are fewer choices like that farmers end up suffering because there's less innovation, there's higher costs, and certainly fewer options out there. But that's going to take a while, I think, to really get a handle on that. So what are those other pieces that we can do in the meantime? Well, it's about the marketplace itself and making sure that we can bring some semblance of working better. They can bring more, that's transparency in some cases. It's making sure that we are actually enforcing things like the Packers and Stockyards Act, and that we strengthen the regulations for that. It's doing things like passing country boards and labeling again, but this time making sure it sticks and stays in. It's a number of those kinds of things where we can begin to transform the marketplace back to the advantage of farmers and ranchers out there. And this is going to be one of our biggest priorities, not only this year, but rolling into next. You'll see a campaign rolling out just a little bit later this year. But depending on where you are, the messaging is going to be tailored to that part of the country. So because we know that this consolidation is happening all across the country, farmers and ranchers, regardless of what they're growing, are impacted by it. And so we want to find solutions to it. But again, in the particularly in the livestock sector, it is long-term trying to get a handle on antitrust, because the consolidation of over 85% of the market within 4 packers, just doesn't make any sense. Getting a handle on the market itself, and so that includes things like supporting bills like 5014, which brings a lot more transparency to the marketplace, requiring packers to not only buy more on the cattle on the cash or open market, but making sure that we kind of enforce delivery in a much more timely manner. There are a number of bills actually around that, and we know that the Senate is interested in it. Now, it's still going to require a lot of work to get that done, but that will be a start. On country of origin labeling, that's going to take a little bit more effort, because it, in its time, enjoyed a huge amount of popularity and a huge amount of support up on Capitol Hill. When it ultimately was removed from law, we lost a tremendous amount of support. And we have a lot more new members of Congress who haven't even had to consider country of origin labeling. But we remain convinced that consumers, when given the choice and they understand the issue, support this overwhelmingly. And it's that public support that I think is going to be encouraging for us to be able to regain support up on Capitol Hill. We have a couple of champions that are going to be there to push it. And we'll be there to kind of grow support among other members and educate those who haven't been around this issue. And obviously, anytime you're dealing with this issue, we also have to be part of the effort to try to make sure that we clear up any misinformation and myths and quite out falsehoods and lies about what it does. So for all of those provisions, I think there is an opportunity here. I think that with packers and stockyards, back in 2008 Farm Bill was the last time that the Packers and Stockyards Act really got some more teeth. There were definitions put in place into the law, which really, I think, put in place a lot more protections for livestock growers. We know that right after that, there were a lot of delays that Congress put on. And then when Vilsack was Secretary of Agriculture last time, he managed to publish some new regulations called the Farmer Fair Practice Rules that finally put those provisions for Packers and Stockyards Act into the regulations. That happened at the very end of that administration. One of the first things that the last administration did was put those on ice, and then pretty systemically, they took each of the provisions themselves and either shelved them completely or let them die. And so now we are right back at the starting gate. Now, we're at the starting gate, but we have the same guy now in there who put those original ones in place. And he has already signaled that it is his intent to go back to this and try to put those protections back in for livestock growers, ranchers, etc. The other thing, of course, that happened in the last administration was that the agency at USDA that houses Packers and Stockyards Act, those in the enforcement, that agency was eliminated. Now, they can't eliminate the law. The law is still there. But clearly, it was a signal that this was not of great importance to them. Now, I don't know what they're going to do with the agency itself. And quite frankly, I think in the end, you could argue it doesn't really matter. As long as you have folks there who understand its importance to livestock growers and that they are intending to enforce it and put some teeth in it. So there, I'm hopeful that we might be able to retain some of that. I think looking a little bit more years down the road, I think we actually stand a real good chance in the Farm Bill of even taking that enforcement and protection for livestock growers to go even further with packers and stockyards. Vilsack has already signaled that he also wants to work with the Department of Justice on antitrust issues across all of the agriculture sector. I think that's good news for farmers and ranchers. But for all of this kind of optimism around a lot of these issues, I think it's also healthy to have a fair amount of skepticism, right? And making sure that that what they end up doing is not going to either have unintended consequences or is going to be directly a counter to the farmer's best interest out there. And so that's what we're watching very carefully. If you talk about other kind of related issues that the new administration is certainly pushing and is prioritizing, beyond kind of the antitrust issues, you also have climate. It's getting a lot of attention right now. And Farmers Union for the past year has been working with a number of other ag groups to make sure that we are united in having farmer-friendly climate programs and initiatives that are going to work. The principles around those are that they have to be voluntary, they have to be market-driven, and they need to be backed up by science. No making this stuff up, right? Or coming up with mandates or new regulations. So in essence, what we see is that a lot of the space that they can do for climate, for agriculture, is about putting more money into conservation programs that farmers already enjoy and that they know, they understand, and are working. And so we make it more available to more farmers and ranchers. It is about, building the blocks for a carbon market, but doing it in a way that farmers are going to be the one that get the benefit of it, and it isn't some third party that strips out the money. That is based on reality, and ultimately that it's economical. Because whatever climate solution you're talking about for agriculture, particularly in today's agriculture with margins so thin or negative some years, you can't participate if it's going to just add cost with little benefit or no benefit to you. So these are the basic messages that are being taken. Now the alliance that I'm talking about is about 66 groups. It actually includes some environmental groups who understand it has to be common sense and in the farmer's best interest. It also includes some conservation groups. It includes most of the major farm groups in there. And our goal is to be as united as possible so that the message is abundantly clear. Farmers are not looking for more regulation and more burdens. It has to be workable for them if it's going to be a win for everybody. And we can start by using in a better way the programs that are already there. That said, there is still a lot of science and a lot of research that needs to be done. And we know that we will get even better answers and solutions to some of the challenges that climate's going to bring us. But we have to have the science to back that up. Now, I talked about skepticism. And on the one hand, I think a lot of farm groups and Farmers Union included is encouraged that we have an administration who's going to take this seriously. But at the same time, we are extraordinarily skeptical in the sense that we are being told that farmers are going to have a seat at the table. So far, our input has been included. We want to make sure that that stays. We also want to make sure that when they speak of lofty goals, and I'll use one example that's being talked about now, is this so-called 30 by 30. The idea of having 30% of the land in conservation protection by the year 2030. Now, there are different versions of that plan, and right now, the only version that President Biden has put in place is asking for a report about what something like this would look like. And he's asked for that report from Secretary Vilsack, as well as a few other secretaries, including Interior, Defense, and others. We have no idea yet what that report will say. It's due in about 90 days. We do know that USDA is going to be reaching out to farmers and ranchers, among others, to get an idea of this. But there's no mention right now of whether or not we're talking about what type of protection this is. Is it personal protection? Are we talking about land takings here? What's the effect on property rights for this? There are really no details at this point. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be skeptical or suspicious, and make sure that we are asking the tough questions and that we are watching it very, very closely. But as they talk about the other pieces of climate, if it is the conservation programs themselves, it's about creating a carbon market that actually works for farmers. We're going to be there making sure that that is done in a correct manner, and any new initiatives, 30 by 30 or anything else, we'll be watching very closely all throughout this process. Tying in a little bit more with climate is obviously for Farmers Union, that also means strong support for biofuels. And I know that in the news, there's also been a lot of attention about the call for more electric vehicles. Fine. I think that we're going to see a continued progression toward that. But we also know the reality is that we're going to see liquid fuels for a very long time, which I think really puts biofuels in the best possible situation, because the most quick, immediate attention to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the fuels and transportation space is by replacing petroleum with biofuels. Corn growers and biofuels production has really kind of led the way in showing the climate-friendly piece of that. And so I think we are positioned well there. I think we will also have in this new administration, we won't have the promises for ethanol, and then trouble delivering on that back and forth with petroleum. I think in this case, we are already hopeful because they've already signaled that they will not be using the waivers of the RFS like the last administration did. But again, that doesn't mean that they're going to do everything we want, and it doesn't mean that they won't potentially do damage. And so we're going to be watching them very carefully. We already have a conversation lined up with the very new EPA administrator who manages the RFS. I think that's scheduled for Thursday of this week. So the conversations are ongoing. We certainly are interested in the spaces here where there's alignment with what our farmers and ranchers want, but very healthy dose of skepticism as well, because I think anytime you see a new administration, that's probably the best approach. And with this one, we want to make sure that we're not going to be buried under regulations or any new burdens here. It's tough enough to farm and ranch. There are a host of other issues. I do want to be mindful of the time though, Luke, and you probably should have cut me off already. But I thank you for letting me share a few minutes here.
Rob, thank you for joining us. I know you're busy out in DC as well. Thanks for just covering an overview of everything that's going on. Just ask that, you keep us in your thoughts and prayers out here in South Dakota. And, especially with the cattle industry, it's really hitting home to a lot of folks, and ethanol too. So real big issues for us in South Dakota. But Rob, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Take care. I hope to see you guys soon.
Take care, Rob. Thanks. Our next guest on today's webinar was going to be Senator Mike Rounds. Unfortunately, due to some scheduling conflicts, we've got a representative of his office here with us today. James Selkert, an egg specialist, is with us. James, welcome, and can you give us an update from Senator Rounds' office, please?
Sure. First off, my given name's James, but I go by Jim, so.
I wanted to be formal for you, Jim.
That's all right.
Welcome,
That's all right.
welcome.
So like Luke said, Jim Selchert, I've been with Senator Rounds technically for a long time. I served in the National Guard for quite a while he was governor. And then after I retired from the National Guard, he hired me on to be an ag specialist for him. So as Rob kind of alluded to with Secretary Vilsack, we've got a pretty good experience with him. Both he and Governor and Mike Rounds served as governors at the same time for about 4 years together in Iowa and South Dakota, respectively. So they've got a good relationship. They did meet prior to his confirmation, and most of what they talked about was beef and cattle related, and then obviously ethanol. Two big things right now in agriculture that we're struggling with getting some consistency in our markets. So couple things, we have reintroduced the state inspected meat, the new markets, and that's basically the legislation that allows our state inspected meat to be shipped across state lines for retailing. It's just kind of a common sense thing. If it's good enough for South Dakota, or if it's good enough for Iowa or Nebraska, it should be able to go across state lines in either direction. The other, Rob hit a lot of the stuff I'm going to hit, which is a pretty good sign for us. Mandatory country of origin labeling, that was brought up. Obviously, Secretary Vilsack was instrumental in that. We are working on a letter to the White House because this is going to be in order to get this back into law again, it's probably going to take some trade negotiation adjustment with particularly Mexico and Canada, and we just redid that. And unfortunately, when we redid that, we didn't address the elephant in the room, which was allowing USA beef to be labeled as such. We're also working actually this week trying to get on to, we were on Grassley's 5014 bill in the last Congress. It's looking like he's going to reintroduce it. And we'll probably be, well, we won't probably, if he reintroduces it, we will be on it. Another thing is about a year ago, well, actually March 19th of last year, Senator Rounds asked the DOJ for an investigation into the Big Four. Rob alluded to the USDA and their enforcement of the Stockyards and Packyards Act. I'm not really sure the USDA is equipped. Obviously, they weren't equipped under the last administration, but even prior to that, to enforce it, I think a relationship between the Secretary of Agriculture and the Department of Justice is probably a better fit. The Department of Justice just did an investigation into the chicken industry, and that actually resulted in some large fines and some jail time for some people that were price fixing. And that was about a 2-year investigation. So we're roughly a year into this investigation. Subpoenas were issued to Tyson, JBS, Cargill, and National Beef first week of June last year. So that's kind of where we sit on that. You don't hear a whole lot out of the Department of Justice. You didn't during their investigation of the chicken industry until they just started to indict people. So, and then probably the last thing on my list, and then I'll open it up to some questions, is just recently the South Dakota legislature passed a resolution 6006, and that was the competition and transparency among livestock packers. We are going to assist in delivering that to Secretary Vilsack and to President Biden. So that's kind of the things that we're working on. We haven't really changed what we want to do from last year to this year. So we're just in the process of reintroducing all the legislation into the Senate and trying to get some bipartisan support, which is absolutely necessary to get most of these things, all of these things passed, actually. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Jim, we do have a question here. I'll ask it.
Okay. Is it in the chat?
It is in the chat. I'll read it out loud, though, for those who may be on the phone.
Sure.
If the Biden tax plan were to pass, do you foresee an impact on farmers using C Corps? It's part 2 question. Also, is eliminating the step-up basis still on the table?
Oh, and I'm not a tax lawyer, so, you know, the way we usually handle these types of things, I actually can't answer that question. I don't know. I know there's a lot of issue with taxing and being able to hand off farms and ranches to future generations, and that's always a concern for Senator Rounds, as it is probably for both Dusty and Senator Thune too, because that's a big deal when we live in the state we live in, where our grandkids are going to take over our operations at some point in time. So, but as far as the tax plan, I don't know that I could really answer that question, but I will take it down and I will get it to one of our tax experts out in DC, and I can sure get an answer back to Luke, and then he can pass it around.
Be great. That'd be great. Thanks, Jim. Jim,
And that would be for, actually, that would be for anything. If you guys get it to Luke, Luke's got my email. Even if it's something we can't answer right away, by all means, shoot it to us. And that's how Senator Rounds knows what's important to you guys. So,
and Jim, yeah, I will reiterate that. Any questions for Senator Rounds' office, you know, contact their office, contact me. You know, I got a pretty good growing relationship here with Jim, so, you know, we can communicate. And Jim, I'll just ask you a question. I know the Beef Integrity Act didn't maybe get where we wanted it to go, but with Senator Rounds' office, anything in the pipeline for, you know, beef producers that can be excited about? I know Senator Fisher's got a bill out there. Chuck Grassley's got a bill out there. Anything you can see forthcoming?
well, I think the big thing to remember is that, you know, and as a producer myself, our cattle and beef industry is a mess right now. There's no consistency. When you see things that happened well, it's about a year ago in March. It was a year ago in March when our fat cattle prices plummeted the same time that boxed beef skyrocketed. And at that point in time, packers hadn't realized any COVID issues as far as the ability to get workers in and out of their doors. And so that sends a message that there's something broken. And Senator Rounds has said this for quite a while, and I'm sure some of you have probably spoken to him in person, but this isn't one bill like the state inspected meat new markets bill or mandatory country of origin labeling or a 5014, or if you look at Senator Fisher's kind of a regionalized version of, and I'm not a big fan of Senator Fisher's bill. She's smarter than me probably in this stuff, but anytime we allow a federal agency to make decisions on what they're going to do, they don't tend to have the best interests of the American people all the time, because there's too many bureaucrats that get in there and kind of mess with things. So we're a little wary, and Senator Rounds has always been wary about overreach on the federal agency side of it. So we're looking at it as a holistic approach to addressing our issues in the beef and cattle industry. And so it's not one thing. We're not hanging our hat on one thing. because we just don't think we just met with Senator Rounds in person about 3 weeks ago in Pierre, and this is one of the things we spent quite a bit of time on is how are we going to address this. So the other piece is obviously, Rob mentioned it, there's some concern. This administration is big on becoming greener and environmentally friendly. And obviously those of us that have family farms and ranches, we've always tried to be that way because, it's something we're going to pass on to our family, our sons and daughters and our grandsons and our granddaughters. So we want to be on the proactive side of trying to find those programs, just like Rob said, that's exactly where we're headed too. So I was glad to hear him say those things. Is we want to address programs that are already working, but then they have to be programs that don't limit the ability of the farmer and the rancher to utilize those resources for their bottom line. So CRP would be a good example of that, being able to at some point in time hay and graze it to allow for the full benefit, the full environmental benefit, but also allow for an economical benefit running yearlings or cow-calf pairs or whatever it be. So
Jim, in the chat box we have a question, and maybe we maybe hit on this just a little bit, but I'll just ask it directly to you. What effects will there be for having a 5014 and Market Transparency Act going on at the same time?
Well, markets aren't my expertise. So I'm a little bit more of a cowboy than I am a marketeer, but the biggest thing is really there's some challenges with 5014, and anybody that watches what's going on, the further south you go, the cash market becomes almost zero. And the further north you go, we have more cash markets. So somehow that has to be addressed. And it would be no different than if we tried to change something on our operation with the farm or the ranch, and we tried to do it all at once, immediate, it's probably not going to be successful. And I see the same thing with the 5014 or the Market Transparency. I assume that's Market Transparency Act, but the bottom line is that to ask a packer to go from zero or almost zero cash market to go to 50%, I would think would be challenging. I know if I were running a packing house and I had to all of a sudden just go, they don't even have, like we can go to Yankton, South Dakota and buy fat cattle or a packer can. That doesn't even exist the further south you go. You don't even have that option of taking fat cattle to a marketplace in large numbers. So hopefully that answers your question. I guess I'd say it's complicated.
Well, I think you're right in many aspects there. I mean, I'm not going to speak for everybody, but I mean, there probably is no perfect situation for everyone to come together, but maybe that's what we need to try to strive for, and know that there are differences between northern United States versus your southern states, just as you had mentioned there. So if we can somehow find a happy medium. Any work coming from Senator Rounds' office in biofuels or ethanol? I know you talked briefly there on clean energy a little bit, or climate change.
One of the things that he's always pushed for the ethanol markets and the inclusion of that into our fuels. I think the biggest concern is the minute we put something like that out there in legislation and then they have the waivers, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the legislation. And it doesn't really matter what the law is. It's kind of like driving across this state on I-90. If every one of us could go apply for a waiver that the speed limit didn't apply to us, I'm not sure how effective a speed limit would be. So I think that's the biggest challenge we have with the ethanol. But obviously he's always pushing for the inclusion of ethanol as an option because it's a renewable fuel source. Now, I don't, our technology gets better every day. Whether you're talking wind energy or ethanol or any of those types of things, they're not cost effective now, but there was a time when computers weren't cost effective, and now we carry them in our pockets. So I think we just need to hang in there and keep trudging forward for the right answers. So organic farming.
Yeah, we've got a question on organic farming. Just any view on grain import fraud?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, but if the question's about, I know with anything organic, there are rules that need to be followed. And a lot of times there's really not, in my opinion, any way or any agency that's doing that. So that when I can market, and I'll just use my own operation, so I feed out some cattle, I can market them as organic, but who out there is saying that it is or it isn't? And so that's a problem we have, being able to enforce those types of marketing. Organic is a marketing thing. People are interested in eating things that are healthier for them. So, and the grain import fraud, I guess I'm not familiar with what the issue is there. I assume it has something.
I can't really elaborate on it on any further.
I'm going to make I'll just make an assumption that it has to do with when imports come in, and that we have an issue with that anytime when imported beef or imported grain, and it says it is organic, and it may or may not be organic according to our country's laws, and so those are challenges. I mean, I guess I'd have to have whoever this is maybe give me a little more information on it. I mean, I'll give out my phone number here too before we finish. So, and then if they have some questions, they can call me anytime they need to.
And again, reach out to me, Luke here at South Dakota Farmers Union, and we can definitely get in touch.
And that's a better method, because what will happen is then someone else may have the same question, then you can push it out to your membership. That works really good.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, thanks so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it and really look forward to continuing our relationship.
Super.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
You as well. Our next guest today is Representative Dusty Johnson. I think he's with us. Representative Johnson, are you with us today?
Absolutely. Had to get to the mute button, Luke. Sorry.
Hello, Representative, and thanks for joining us. Happy National Egg Day today from South Dakota. So very happy you could join us. This whole webinar Zoom meeting is just giving a national legislative update. A lot going on in DC. We thank you for your work, and would just like to take this opportunity to hear from you any updates that you're working on from your office.
Well, first, I will just observe you guys have really pulled together the varsity team on this deal. I mean, obviously there are some folks like Kristen and Mitch Richter and Chris Nelson, and I saw Kent Frerich's name earlier that I've known for a long, long time. Now I know Sharon Stroshine. I'm not sure that's her, but I've known her for a long time too. And it's just great. Obviously, you guys pulled together a lot of people who care about the future of rural America and ag. And that's really what John Weber, my legislative director, he's on the call, and I are working on every single day. There is a lot going on in this space from an agricultural perspective. And so, Luke, I thought maybe what I'd do is tell you what I view, Secretary Vilsack's agenda is, what I see the Ag Committee Chairman on the House side, what I see his agenda as, and then I'll talk about some of the stuff that I'm looking to do. And then if there are areas you guys want to dive into a little deeper, we can. Make sense?
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, I do, John and I just talked to Secretary Vilsack at length, maybe last Wednesday or last Thursday. And he clearly is interested in lots of climate change issues. We talked a lot about the carbon bank. I'm sure a number of your members know a lot about that conceptually. And Secretary Vilsack made it clear, I mean, he doesn't have a preconceived notion about exactly what this looks like. He understands they're going to have to walk before they run. He understands that in the country, there is a lot of interest in a new revenue stream, kind of a new market for producers, as well as an interest in trying to make sure that we're doing something on the carbon side. But he also understands that kind of the private market mechanisms that are out there have not done a great job for producers. There have been lots of administrative costs. I don't know that a lot of the value has hit the producer level. And frankly, we've got an ag sector that had made incredible improvements from an environmental perspective, from a carbon perspective. We'll talk about biofuels in a little bit, but biofuels 46% less carbon intensive than gasoline. We've got farming practices that have come a long way. The efficiency has come a long way. The technology that so many of you are using in your operations are just heads and tails above what we had just a few years ago. And I think Vilsack understands that. And I think he's trying to struggle with how do you give credit for best practices that have been in place in some instances for years, while also wanting to change behavior from people who aren't doing that. I think, we try to caution USDA anytime we talk to them to try to work with producers rather than get caught up in some of this messaging that I think is counterproductive. When the governor of Colorado calls for a meat out, I don't know that really helps us come together to solve the carbon problem. When you look at the efficiency of how much more efficiently we're producing beef now than we were 40 or 50 years ago, it's remarkable. And I think it's a problem. I think it would be better for USDA to focus, as I think they will, on technology and innovation rather than on Americans having to have to do without. As far as David Scott, he's the new House Republican chairman. Colin Peterson, a name well known to many of you, was a guy who he and I may have been on different sides of the aisle, but we worked a lot together because his backyard was my backyard. I mean, he understood small cow-calf producers. He understood small feeders. He understood dairy. He understood row crops. And this was a guy who, he and I did a lot of pieces of legislation together. And with David Scott, we've got somebody who's got also a friend of mine. I'm not as close with the chairman as I was with Colin, but we work well together. His top priorities are going to be climate, like with Vilsack. He also has a real passion for socially disadvantaged farmers and historically disadvantaged farmers. And the last COVID package, some of you probably saw, had some really aggressive and robust financial mechanisms that were available for African-American farmers and others relatively narrowly defined. And, that is not traditionally an area where South Dakota has been as focused, but I still think there'll be plenty of areas where we can work with Chairman Scott on. As far as what do John and I care about, the stuff that we go to work every day on. Clearly biofuels is big. I'm just a sophomore, but I was named earlier this year as the co-chairman, one of the co-chairmen of the Biofuels Caucus. And I think because in my first 2 years, that was something that I was laser focused on. Colin Peterson and I came together to introduce the RFS Integrity Act, very highly regarded. Clearly EPA was playing a lot of games with SREs. They weren't showing their work. I think they were making decisions that were not consistent with the spirit of the law. Now that Colin is not in Congress, Angie Craig, Democrat from Minnesota, and I are working on the RFS integrity. She and I worked together a lot. She and I worked together to get the cover crop situation addressed 2 years ago. Some of you will remember we had a powerfully wet year, and a lot of us were concerned about forage. A number of you were giving me ideas about what we could do to tackle it. One of which was to move that cover crop harvest date for PP acres from November 1st to September 1st. Angie and I introduced a bill to do that. We got the administration to do it administratively, but we haven't given up on the issue. And it's something that Angie and I continue to push, and I think we're making some progress on. I also care a lot about the livestock arena. I've been named the ranking member on the livestock subcommittee. Again, I think that's an unusual honor for a sophomore. It's also unusual for somebody in our neck of the woods. It's been 40 years since somebody from the Northern Great Plains has been the ranking member on the livestock subcommittee. Traditionally, it's been way more likely to be Texas, California, Florida, North Carolina. Those states have probably held it for 3/4, maybe 2/3 of that 40 years. And they have a very different livestock arena than we do. And so I think we're excited to call some attention to that. Last year, we had introduced the Price Act. We'll be reintroducing it. And it's a powerful package of not necessarily home runs, because you can't get home runs done in DC. And more often than not, when you're swinging for the fences, you strike out. So this is a collection of singles and doubles. Some of that, 12 of them, some of them are my ideas, but they're bipartisan. Some of them are from Henry Cuellar, some from Darren Soto, Republican Jim Hagedorn, 3 or 4 others. And we pulled these ideas together, and I won't go through all 12, but I'll maybe mention just 3. It deals with the cover crop issue we were talking about earlier. It's got the Direct Act in it, which was our idea to allow state inspected meat processors to sell across state lines direct to consumers. And ours is the only idea like that has in essence gotten the blessing of FSIS, which is remarkable. You hear a lot of people pitch ideas out there about interstate shipments of beef, but or meat more generally. We're the only ones who crafted a solution that we think can get around some of the trade and some of the food safety barriers that the administration has been concerned about. We want a lot more transparency in the livestock space. Our Price Act calls for the establishment of a beef contract library. We got that on the pork side, and I think it works well. And as we see more and more of those transactions move away from the sale barn, we want to have transparency in a different way. And I think a beef contract library would be a big part of that. Maybe the other thing I would mention, and then we'll open it up, if that's all right, Luke, is we just view our job as really being the leading rural advocate, or rather advocate for rural America in Congress. There are only 45 House members whose districts are mostly rural by population. And so as a result of those of us who understand rural, I worked for USDA Rural Development 20 or 23 years ago. It's been a passion of mine, whether I was at the Public Utilities Commission or whether I was in the governor's office or whether I was in the private sector out doing rural broadband in 40 states, as I did for 4 years. I mean, rural infrastructure and rural advocacy it's one of the defining missions of our office, and has been since our very first day, our very earliest days in office. We had a retreat, and we said, these are the things that we are going to get known for. And rural advocacy is at the top of the list. So I don't know, John, what did I hit? What did I not hit on that I should have?
Well, I think one thing you missed was one of the pieces of the Price Act was also the overtime relief bill that was included in the last package. Yeah,
John is always good. I'm terrible at taking victory laps, because I'm kind of, what can we do next and what can we do next? But John, works so hard to actually get these things accomplished. He doesn't want us to forget them. But yeah, we had been pushing a proposal to help small processors with overtime. When they run an overtime to pick up the slack when our supply chain was disrupted, they had to pay for federal inspectors to be there, and they were paying a higher portion of that share than the large packers were, which didn't make any sense. So we stepped up and got a very favorable cost share for the small packers, small processors, and an extremely favorable cost share for the very small. We were able to get that worked in to the COVID package that passed and has been signed into law. And so that, it's not going to lead to 6 o'clock news, but that's the kind of behind the scenes blocking and tackling we're doing to actually get things enacted into law. Good job, John.
Representative Johnson, I know you're a strong advocate for the cattle industry, cow-calf operations. Where do we see cool at? I mean, is there really going to be any chance of getting cool mandatory?
Very, very limited. I mean, and I get it. It's super politically popular to talk about cool and to kind of get people in the country whipped into a frenzy about it. I mean, there is nothing you can say at a sale barn or, in Buffalo or in Bison or in Hot Springs that will get people more excited for the speech than to talk about MCOOL. It's a huge political winner. But I just can't, most politicians, when they're talking about it, are misleading people. And they'll take all the political, attaboys and attagirls without really explaining the political reality. I mean, the reality is, to get that done, I would need to get 218 votes in the United States House to implement MCOOL. There's nobody in the country today who could get that done today. And anybody who tells you otherwise is lying to you, or they're ignorant. And the reason is that Canada and Mexico, they've been very smart. They made it very clear that as allowed under the WTO rules, they would impose $1 billion retaliatory tariffs. They've been very clear about where those tariffs would go. And they would target blueberries and raspberries and cotton and maple syrup. Well, I'm sorry, gang, there's just nobody who can go get the votes of the people in New England to support MCOOL when it would devastate the maple syrup industry. I can't go get the votes of the California delegation when vegetables and fruits would be so negatively impacted by the retaliatory tariffs. And so I know people get frustrated when they say, oh, the politicians always talk about MCOOL, but they don't ever deliver on it. And it's because you cannot get 218 votes for it. Now, the only reason the reason I hedged a little bit on the front end, Luke, is that it is at least theoretically possible to go renegotiate those agreements with Mexico and Canada to secure MCOOL from them as a part of the deal. Now, I have talked to Robert Lighthizer, the previous USTR, numerous times about that. During the renegotiation of NAFTA, the USMCA, I talked to him about MCOOL no fewer than 3 times. And he understood how important it was to Rounds and Thune and Johnson, but they also said we were just going to have to overpay for it. He said, I want to, and here are 1,000 things we want to get. I know that through this negotiation, I'm only going to get 700 of them. The Canadians are going to get a certain number too, right? And I want to get the 700 that I can get at the most reasonable price. And they are overcharging for MCOOL. And Dusty, I know it's popular back home, but it's going to be hard for us to get that unless the Canadians and the Mexicans really change what their negotiating stance. So we're going to keep trying, Luke, but it's going to be a while before we renegotiate USMCA, I assume. Does that make sense?
Well, continuing on the topic of cattle, obviously there's reasons MCOOL isn't going to work and going to fly, but we still, as Farmers Union, support it strongly just because we value our products so much.
Yeah.
5014, where are we at with that?
Yeah, Deb Fischer has introduced her bill, and it's got a lot of attention. I do think we need a tremendous amount more transparency. I am probably more, I'd align myself more with the concept that was outlined by IBAW and others in the wake of the Holcomb fire and the COVID-19 disruption. They laid out in their after-action investigation a concept that would set some regional benchmarks, and to the extent packers weren't hitting the regional benchmarks, that USDA could step in and in essence call for more cash trade. I'm intrigued by that. I think there are also some problems. John and I have tried to be, creative. And how can we reward? How can we incent more cash transactions? Because I do think they're critically important for price discovery. And so if you guys have other ideas, we're all ears. I do think 5014 is going to be, I think, politically difficult to get done. But, mandatory price reporting is going to get done this year. And frankly, there will be 100 twists and turns between now and when it gets done by the end of the year. It's really hard to know where we go.
Shifting gear, Representative Johnson, South Dakota Farmers Union supports Medicaid expansion in South Dakota, and we're only one of 12 states that hasn't done it yet. It would bring another $300+ million and a 5% bump in the next 2 years with the recent COVID legislation. Are you supportive of helping us pass this to help needy South Dakotans that are falling between the cracks?
Not unless the administration was open to a work requirement. The previous administration was open to work requirements. And I'm clearly not talking for anybody who's disabled or anybody who's elderly or anybody with young dependents at home. But for me, if you're a 27-year-old able-bodied man at home who doesn't have a job, why don't you have a job? For me, if I was going to go from here to the Corn Palace, I would probably pass no fewer than 14 help wanted signs, Luke. And I think if we had a Biden administration that was really open to talking about work as a requirement for welfare programs, they would find in me somebody who was a lot more open to expansion of these programs. But as long as they view work as punishment rather than as opportunity, I just can't get on board with that.
Do other states require?
Oh, a number of other states required work under the previous administration. They received waivers. This administration has canceled all of those waivers. So for Medicaid, work is no longer, I mean, there are not workfare programs with regard to Medicaid anymore.
I'm jumping kind of all over the board here, Representative Johnson. So I know you were saying, you were talking about biofuels, and I wanted to share with you something that recently came out, and it was a study from the University of Nebraska. It was a study that came out in late February. So the study goes like this: if 10% of Nebraskans fueled their non-flex vehicles with E30, the report found that CO2 emissions would go down by 64,000 tons per year, and that this would increase ethanol consumption by 18.5 million gallons. And that's just 10% of Nebraska population. Doing my South Dakota math on that, that's over 6 million bushels of grain that could be marketed to a ethanol plant for premium. So if the premium is approximately 15 cents, we're talking $1 million on 10% of those vehicles just by fueling up with ethanol. $1 million in value added ag. So I just wanted to share that statistic with you. I don't know if you had heard that or not, but you talk about singles and doubles. I mean, maybe that's even a bunt, but it's just another statistic that shows how valuable ethanol can really be.
Yeah, we talk about that stuff at the Biofuels Caucus all the time. And Luke, you're right. It clearly would have a further impact on price. And frankly, I mean, we should all like North American energy, and it is clean. It's good stewardship. We know that when consumers are given the choice of buying ethanol, they do overwhelmingly. E0 is not bought at very many pumps where E10 or E20 or E30 is an option. And so I think we want to continue to have investment in the infrastructure necessary to make higher blends available to more people, and just keep moving the ball downfield. You're right.
Well, we appreciate your support in all of those arenas, Representative Johnson. Any final remarks as far as anything coming up the pipeline interesting to South Dakota, beef or row crop? John, what are we missing?
I would just say, obviously we're expecting something to happen in terms of the regulatory review on CFAP. So, we kind of read the tea leaves on what Secretary Vilsack has commented, but interesting to see how that works.
And we did, I lobbied Vilsack extensively on our call last week about CFAP and WHIP. And I think there'll be some announcements relatively soon.
Well, again, Representative Johnson, thanks for your time today. Thanks for agreeing to be with us. Can we count on you in the future to visit with us again?
Oh, I suppose. You weren't too rude. It always helps when you don't give Richter too much mic time.
There you go. Well, again, Representative Johnson, thanks for your time and best of luck to you, and thanks for all your work you do for us. So
yeah, you bet. And Sharon, I love the mustache. It's really coming in great. Take care, everybody.
Well, thanks everyone for attending. And if any questions, feel free to email me. It's lreindl, LREINDL @sdfu.org. And if you had some questions that we missed or ones that you want to ask, we'll make sure we get those to the appropriate people. So thanks again, everyone, and stay dry today.